So I want to make a video today about some of the things that I was just thinking about on the subject matter of these people that do ancestral worship and ancestral practices. I want to give about 10 verses that will show, or at least about 10 verses that will show that the act in itself can't be done to anything else. And so they say they burn incense in communication to their ancestors. And they do so because they are in reverence to God. Okay, no problem. Let's look at what the entire idea was around incense burning for the Israelites. I'm going to have to break this video up into two portions. I was just kind of like trying to structure the video in a way that I could do it in one, but I think it would be more beneficial if I split it into two. Part number 2 will deal with Numbers chapter number 16, because Numbers chapter number 16 gives a scenario where the congregation rose up to want to burn incense individually. And I want to show that that was not actually for a good thing. If in case someone tries to make that case, I'll do a breakdown on that one. And so please do like the video, give it a thumbs up. It will help it out in the algorithm. This did take a minute for me to structure up and stuff. So the first chapter that I want to bring up will be from Numbers chapter number 16. As I stated, I'll do an entire breakdown of the chapter so that you can see that this situation was not a good one. Okay? And so verse number 8, Moses said unto Korah had come up with this thing. They didn't want to hear from Moses. They wanted to do these things for themselves. And so, here I pray you, ye sons of Levi. This is Moses that's saying this. Since it be a small thing unto you that God of the Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near him to do this service of tabernacle unto the Lord, and stand before the congregation to minister unto them. And so right here you can see this particular act of burning incense was given to the Israelites. And so that's the point that I want to take from that chapter. And as I stated, we'll come back to it as a whole. Now, if you actually study, kind of like if you do research in a lot of materials that were used, particularly in the temple, the altar and the altar that was built and the Ark of the Covenant where they built them quite interestingly out of acacia tree. The acacia tree, what is known as the acacia, it grows mostly around areas which flood or where large body of waters actually flow. And it is a very unique tree because it is actually a tree that can sustain even though there is no water for a very long period. If you actually go into Jeremiah chapter number 17, it actually talks about this. And as a matter of fact, even in the New Testament, this particular tree is actually the one that's referenced as the tree along the wayside of the waters, basically. And so this particular tree, this acacia tree, it can the seeds of this tree can actually travel because it stays around the waters, right near the banks, or even in the middle of the thing. If you actually research it, you'll find that. And so when the water comes, of course, it's going to carry that seed and disperse it across. So it spreads. It's mostly popular around the area of Arabia and in Africa. Now, this particular tree, because it can stand for a very long period without life or anything, without water, when it does get water, it then kind of distributes that and it can sustain from that. The moment the water comes back, it springs up as if there was nothing that had ever gone thingy. That's very important. Now, remember those two references that I made earlier on when I said the Ark of the Covenant and the altar in the temple were actually made of this tree. You'll find that in Exodus chapter number 25, verse 9 and 10, and the Ark of the altar itself, Exodus chapter number 27, verse number 1. It actually gives a reference for that. And so because I wanted to give it that kind of background so that you can understand some of these elements, they have a meaning. And so the very altar that you see in there, it symbolizes this tree that was used to build the Ark of the Covenant and the altar in the temple. They represent endurance. You can see that's kind of like the tree that it was instructed to go and use. Okay, now why did I want to add that? Because remember, this service here, according to Numbers chapter number 16, was given particularly to Israel for them to do. Now, as I stated that I will have to come back to this particular chapter to do an entire breakdown, but I wanted to you guys to also note these verses here. Okay, if you go to Exodus chapter number 30, verse number 1, it says, you make an altar on which to burn the incense. And so remember, the trees, the altar is built off of this tree that symbolizes long and endurance without any point of survival, which is kind of like the state in which the spirit that we are given can withstand the difficulties that we enjoy in this life, as it represents that endurance as well. And so it speaks of that acacia tree. And so the altar on which the incense was burnt was off of that. Okay, now we're still coming to the revelation aspect of what we are seeing in these verses. Second Chronicles chapter number 26, verse number 16, it says, but when he is strong, he grows proud to his destruction. Okay, notice, for he was unfaithful unto the Lord his God, and he entered into the temple to burn incense on the altar and thing. And so it speaks of this thingy which is attached to pride. So the action of him coming into the temple and burn incense unpleasing to God was in his pride. That's the thing to note here. It's that there is such a thing that you can actually do so out of the cause of your pride. If you go further into Second Chronicles, okay, so that was the first one was Second Chronicles chapter number 26, 16. If you go to Second Chronicles chapter 34, verse 25, it says, because they have forsaken me. Okay, so the first reason, there is this pride that is attached to people wanting to continue to do it. And then now in Second Chronicles chapter number 34, verse 25, because you have forsaken me and you have made offerings to other gods, that you might provoke me in anger with the works of your hands. Therefore, my wrath is poured out in place with it. So without quenching, basically, he goes on to actually put it in that manner. And so, first, it is a departure unto doing sacrifices unto other gods. Number two, it is actually a destructive nature that actually brings up that. That's what you see in chapter number 26. If you go forward into Psalms 141, verse number 1 and 2, it says, let my prayers be counted as incense before God. So this shows that incense were a reflection of the prayers of the saints, as it actually says. Okay, it was not to communicate to an ancestor, it was directly unto God, and to lift up and the lifting up of our hands so this is how my prayer should be seen, as the evening sacrifice. So it is very clear when you're burning incense, this was the viewpoint that you had, that this is a form of sacrifice unto God. It was me giving myself unto God. Now, this aspect of myself unto God, will come to that as we enter the New Testament. And so, Isaiah chapter number 1, verse number 12 up until 13 then brings up this idea that bring no more vain offerings. Incense is an abomination unto me. So your incense are an abomination unto me. Your new moons, your Sabbaths, and your calling of convocation, I cannot enjoy in your iniquities solely in the assembly. So this idea that God had come to a position of despising the very thing that they were doing, claiming it to be unto God. Then you come to Jeremiah chapter number 44, verse number 3, it says, because of their evil, because they have provoked me unto anger, in that they went up to offering unto other gods they knew not. Okay, someone just told you that those are your ancestors. You all know that for sure. Okay, and it says, neither neither they nor you or your father. So basically, they are not known in your generations. This particular God that you are burning these things unto, they are not known to you nor to your fathers. So he actually puts it. If you go to Jeremiah, right? To Jeremiah chapter number 1, I'm gonna put it up here. Jeremiah chapter number 1, verse number 16, as I've written it there. Right. There's something that it brings up. It says, I will utter my judgments against them, touching all their wickedness, who have forsaken me and have burnt incense unto other gods. So you can see this particular act of burning incense very clear there. It's very clearly spoken. And worship the works of their own hands. Okay, people create dumbrezing and whatnot and all those type of things. And you can see, actually there's a verse that I was looking for, which actually puts it like that, to say, when people actually build the temple, the incense were made to be burnt within this temple where God was worshipped. And so people, what do? They build ndumbas and so forth in order to continue with this practice. So if you go to actually chapter number 17 there, if you go to chapter number 17, verse number 5 and 6, this is how it puts it. It says, cursed, that saith the Lord, cursed be the man that trusts in men. And so you have your ancestors there, and people are giving their thinking, yeah, cursed is that man that puts his trust that another man, being the ancestors, would do something. Okay, you get it? The man that put his trust in men and maketh the flesh his arm. So your strength, the strength of your life, is those that are dead. You can actually put it in that manner. It also does speak to that. Whose heart departeth from the Lord. And so his heart is now devoted into these things of involvement with, communications with people that are dead. It says, and he shall be like the heather is like a tree form that actually forms around the desert, in the desert, and shall not see when the good cometh, but inhabits the places in which the wilderness is in salt lands and in uninhabited. So basically, if a person departs from God, he comes to this place where he he's confined by himself or in his own place. This is kind of like the idea that you see when you read this particular verse. Now, I will come back to actually verse number 7 and 8 when I read the numbers, because it actually continues that idea. And so what you see around the verses that I just read for you right now, you'll see that this particular act was around this idea of endurance. It's an aspect of relationship. When you are in relationship with God, there is endurance that you endure out here in this earth. That's reflected when we come to a relationship with Christ. This is why, and so just like I gave you the example of what kind of trees that were used and whatnot, like if you look at frankincense and stuff, which is very expensive, herbs that they actually use right now, it's built from these trees that they actually, it's a family tree of about 500 species, but in frankincense itself is taken from about less than 10 trees out of that family of trees. It's taken from about, which is actually trees that are very rare, which is why it's very expensive. Now, so what do? They tap these trees on the sides, and then the milky thing that comes out from these trees is what they take and they use for making this sense. And so it took this long period for them to build thingy, and then they kind of like grade the incense, the frankincense as they think. It was this idea of endurance, which is what we find in relationship with God. It's endurance to trusting Him, endurance to trusting the relationship that God gives us. So when we now revert back into the old of wanting to burn incense, is that we are refraining from what relationship He has given. Because remember, the idea of this entire thing is that it is incense that is burnt on the very aspect of endurance, because remember it's burnt on that altar. And what is it that built this altar? Is this tree that is actually built out of a wood that is from this long-standing endurance. And so the elements, when you study these elements, when you look at these elements, they actually do show you an aspect of relationship. People are going back to these things because they don't understand. These are shadows that we now have to give us an example of what God has brought us into. I thought this would be a very interesting one to bring up all these verses and bring them here. Also, the next video, I will be doing a study on that other one, on Numbers chapter number 16, because I think that one you have to do a deep dive, because someone can quote a verse in there without noticing that that verse is actually not speaking in favor of, it's actually speaking in opposition, because those people are not exactly in line with God. And so that video I'll do right after this one.